What's up, world? I'm Cameron McKinney, and this is Pop Culture Spotlight, a podcast about the career of actor Brad Pitt. In the case of most movie stars, there are early signs they're going to be something special, and that's certainly the case with Brad Pitt. I've always been impressed with young actors who can be good in supporting roles, and Pitt proved that early on with two performances in 1991's Thelma and Louise, where he plays hitchhiker and wannabe criminal JD, and in 1993's True Romance as Floyd, a stoner. He's a scene stealer in both films, and he leaves the audience wanting more. When it comes to the early leading performances for Brad Pitt, it was a bit of a mixed bag. You have 1992's A River Runs Through It, directed by Robert Redford, and 1994's Legends of the Fall, directed by Ed Zwick. And look, I think these are good movies, but they kind of feel like an attempt to turn Pitt into a matinee idol. Also in 1994, he was outshined by co-stars Kirsten Dunst and Tom Cruise in Interview with a Vampire. If I had to pick the year Brad Pitt truly found himself as an actor, it would definitely be in 1995, where he starred in two movies. Terry Gilliam's 12 Monkeys, where he played an extreme environmentalist, and David Fincher's Seven, where he portrays a wide-eyed detective, David Mills. And that film is where Pitt had his first iconic moment on screen with the famous "What's in the Box?" For 12 Monkeys, Pitt received his first Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actor, and both of these films were hits. 12 Monkeys made $168 million, while Seven made $327 million. The consensus around Brad Pitt is that the performances of his that don't work for people are the ones that you can tell he's really trying hard. You can see the effort, and they include The Devil's Own, where he has an Irish accent, and 7 Years in Tibet, where he has an Austrian accent. Both films were in 1997. You can see Pitt trying to lose himself in these roles, but he's also losing the effortless movie star quality that makes him stand out in the first place. A movie I want to fixate on for a moment is 1998's Meet Joe Black, where Pitt is tasked with playing the role of Death, and this is a performance I'm 50-50 on. I can see it from both sides. I agree with people when they say it's awkward seeing Pitt play someone experiencing life for the first time, but when it comes to the romantic elements, I thought Brad Pitt was in top-notch form. Let's now talk about one of the best runs of Pitt's career, beginning with 1999's Fight Club, his second film with director David Fincher, where Pitt plays Tyler Durden. For me, it's one of the best performances of his career, and a risk that really paid off. Him and Ed Norton were brilliant together. This is one of those Brad Pitt movies that have stood the test of time. I mean, people are still talking about Fight Club. It is one of the most interesting movies ever. I know some people love it, some people hate it, but we all agree that it's intriguing what the movie is trying to do. And I sometimes feel like Brad Pitt does not get enough credit for wanting to play a character like Tyler Durden. A lot of leading men do not want to play complicated parts. They want to play likable heroes, but Pitt is just way more interested in challenging himself as an actor. In 2000, Pitt played bare-knuckle boxer Mickey in Guy Ritchie's Snatch. Say what you want about his accent in this movie, but I love Pitt in Snatch. I think it is one of the funnest performances of his career, and I think Snatch is Guy Ritchie's magnum opus. I love that movie, and Brad Pitt is my favorite part in it. 2001 for me was a special year for Brad Pitt, as he had 3 films, beginning with Gore Verbinski's The Mexican with Julia Roberts. Pitt is playing a fun doofus. It's an underrated gem. For me, The Mexican is an example of him and Julia Roberts completely selling a movie on their own. It's what you want from a movie star. It's like, just make this movie watchable, and that's exactly what Brad Pitt did. And very few movie stars at the height of their powers have the ability to do that, to make an entire movie watchable. I think that's what a real movie star does. No matter what movie they are in, they turn it into something entertaining. They carry the film, and that's what Brad Pitt did on The Mexican. His second film of 2001 was the late great Tony Scott's Spy Game, which pairs him on screen with a legend. Many compare him to Robert Redford. Here's what Pitt told the HFPA about working with Redford as an actor actor, quote, "It was really nice working with Redford as a director the first time in A River Runs Through It, and it was even nicer on Spy Game when we're both on the same side of the camera and bouncing off of each other, because he's just acting in this movie and we're both spies, the younger one and the older one. It's a protege-mentor relationship in the beginning, so it worked well for this film because we already had that history. I was looking forward to sitting across the table from him, now being a little bit more comfortable and understanding the business a little more, being able to swap stories and ask him questions, so we had great fun between takes that way. Back then in 1992, I was green and I was working with one of the icons of cinema, so there was more of an intimidation factor, but it's such a different relationship where you can now meet somewhat like peers," end quote. Spy Game might not at the end of the day be viewed as one of Brad Pitt's best movies, but it is a fun, entertaining thriller. And any movie that has the star wattage of Robert Redford and Brad Pitt is worth seeking out. Pitt's last but certainly not least film in 2001 was Steven Soderbergh's Ocean's 11, and what's obvious to anyone that watches it is the best part of that film and its two sequels is the friendship between Pitt's Rusty Ryan and Danny Ocean, played by George Clooney. I know for most people George Clooney's Ocean is the face of this franchise, but I absolutely love Brad Pitt as Rusty. I think it's one of his best characters. I think it's his best movie star role. You want to show somebody the definition of a movie star, you show them Ocean's 11 and they get to see Brad Pitt. So for this podcast, I was looking at the career of Brad Pitt, obviously, and I saw something interesting, that his three biggest hit movies box office wise are not his best movies, and they are 2013's World War Z, 2004's Troy, and 2005's Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Those three in that order are his highest grossing films. World War Z made $540 million, Troy made $497 million, and Mr. and Mrs. Smith made $478 million. Pitt is a massive draw no matter the quality of the film, and out of those three I just mentioned, the one I like the most is Troy. It's flawed but ambitious, and Pitt is really good in it. I'm left wondering if maybe sometimes Brad Pitt is left off of the discussion of the best actor of his generation because the three most movies people have seen him in are not very good. I mean, those aren't great films. His most popular movies are not his best work, yet those are the movies that everyone has seen. Everyone has watched Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Everyone has watched Troy, and everyone has watched World War Z. Now, I think Brad Pitt walks away fine in each of those films. He's good in those movies, but you don't walk away from those movies going, wow, that Brad Pitt is a great actor. On the other end of the spectrum, Pitt has been in really good movies that were not as widely seen. The most famous examples are the two films he made with writer-director Andrew Dominik, beginning with 2007's The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. Pitt is brilliantly subtle as the larger-than-life Jesse James. It's insane he wasn't nominated for an Oscar for this performance, and I still to this day believe not enough people have seen this movie. And Pitt's willingness to play the role of Jesse James in this film is one of the reasons he's one of my favorite actors. The Assassination of Jesse James is also the best looking movie Brad Pitt has ever been in. His second film with Dominik was 2013's Killing Them Softly, which sees Pitt play a hitman, a great crime movie, where for the third time in his career, Pitt shares the screen with the late great James Gandolfini. The pair also worked together on The Mexican and in True Romance. Their scenes together in Killing Them Softly are some of the best acting moments of Brad Pitt's and Gandolfini's career. It's my belief that the director who's gotten the best work from Pitt is David Fincher. They worked on 3 films together, 7, Fight Club, and The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. But a close runner-up would have to be writer-director Quentin Tarantino, whom Pitt worked with on 2009 Inglourious Basterds, an example of Pitt doing a fun accent, and 2019's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where Pitt played stuntman Cliff Booth. It's the film that got Pitt his first ever Oscar win. It's also worth noting that Tarantino was the writer of True Romance. Right now, there's a lot of talk about Quentin Tarantino making his 10th and final film, it would be criminal if Brad Pitt is not a key participant in that final film. I want to focus more on Brad Pitt's 2019 because we all talk about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but what not enough people talk about is his other great performance of that year in James Gray's Ad Astra. Yes, I know a lot of people make fun of that movie's emotional arc. They simplify it as an astronaut who's having daddy issues. But Brad Pitt is phenomenal in that movie. I really like the voiceover work he does in it. And Pitt should have also been Oscar nominated for his performance in that. Ad Astra is a great space movie. Time to talk about my absolute favorite Brad Pitt performance, which comes in 2011's Moneyball, where he's playing then Oakland Athletics general manager Billy Beane. This is the type of great performance I've been talking about. He's just so effortlessly a movie star who's got non-baseball fans to care about this guy. He humanized him and sold the movie in a way that no other actor is capable of doing. I think he should have won an Oscar for his performance in Moneyball. It is one of the best acting performances of the 2010s and of all time, in my opinion. It's my favorite sports movie, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. On this podcast, I've really been talking about the serious work Pitt has done as an actor. He's also really funny in movies, especially in the Coen brothers film Burn After Reading in 2007 and 2015's The Big Short from Adam McKay. He's also really funny in Bullet Train and The Lost City, both in 2022. Brad Pitt is a funny actor. I'm not saying he's the funniest actor of all time, but when he wants to be the funniest thing in a movie, he is certainly capable of being that. And it's that quality that makes him, along with his Ocean's co-star George Clooney, one of my favorite actors, is that they can do the serious dramatic work, but also be really funny playing these bozo characters. And what I like about movies like The Big Short and Burn After Reading is that it shows that Brad Pitt doesn't take himself too seriously as an actor. Like, I love Leonardo DiCaprio, but I could not imagine him playing a supporting role in a movie like The Big Short. Pitt clearly views himself beyond being just a leading man, and that's what my favorite actors do. Yes, I mean, when you think of the great leading men of all time, the name Brad Pitt is going to come up, but this is a guy who has also delivered really good supporting turns in really good movies. Yes, I've heard some people say about how sometimes it's a distraction when Brad Pitt shows up in a movie like 12 Years a Slave, but I find it really admirable that he's willing to play a bit part in a movie like that, because he's clearly a fan of the movie and he's not just looking out for his career. Pitt has worked with a great list of directors: Fincher, Tarantino, Soderbergh, Ridley Scott, the Coen brothers, but they're still great filmmakers the actor has yet to work with. And I'm mainly thinking of Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, and Paul Thomas Anderson. Like, I need to see him work with those great directors. And Brad Pitt was once attached to star in a Martin Scorsese film. He was going to be part of the original cast of The Departed, but he departed that film and made something else. I can't imagine what Paul Thomas Anderson would want to do with somebody like Brad Pitt. I mean, PTA loves to work with and against a movie star's persona. He's done it with Tom Cruise in Magnolia and with Adam Sandler in Punch Drunk Love. I also mentioned Steven Spielberg, and what's interesting about Spielberg is, yes, he's worked with Titanic movie stars before, like Tom Cruise and like Tom Hanks, but a lot of his movies are not carried by movie stars, and I think that's one of the reasons Brad Pitt has yet to work with the famous director. I think what we need as a culture is a Martin Scorsese film that co-stars Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt. With every famous movie star, there's always that question: are they a good actor or are they just a movie star? And with Brad Pitt, it's always been a complicated question because by many people, he's viewed solely as a gigantic movie star. But I hope with this podcast, I have made the case that he is also a great actor. And I believe the biggest reason is because he challenges himself. He could easily lead big movies and be the bland lead of them, but instead makes director-driven films. I also find it funny when a bunch of people put movies of Brad Pitt's on like that all-time great list, like Seven, Fight Club, or The Assassination of Jesse James, but they won't acknowledge that Brad Pitt is the reason those movies exist in the first place. I mean, if Brad Pitt doesn't star in The Assassination of Jesse James, that movie does not get made. He has used his star power to make these one-of-a-kind films. And other than the Ocean's movies, Brad Pitt has never been a part of a franchise or that many sequels. I mean, he only has the Ocean films, and I think we all agree that was the right franchise for him to be a part of, if you even want to use that dirty word to describe those movies. Pitt is not all of a sudden going to show up in a Marvel or a DC film, mainly because he doesn't have to. I do want to close out this podcast talking about where Brad Pitt is currently at. He's still at the top of his game, in my opinion, as an actor. I loved his work as a tragic fallen movie star in Damien Chazelle's Babylon. I know that is a movie that people have mixed opinions on, but I believe it's brilliant. I also really liked Brad Pitt in this year's Wolves, which once again pairs him with George Clooney. Now, there's been a lot of controversy surrounding the movie Wolves because it was an Apple movie and they announced a sequel, and now it's been announced by the writer-director of that film, John Watts, that he's not interested in making a sequel because he felt lied to by Apple. It's fascinating that now a movie star as big as Brad Pitt is now swept in the streaming nonsense that's happening with Apple, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, you name it. What's so weird about Wolves not making it into movie theaters is the fact that Brad Pitt is still one of the last movie stars who can sell a movie. I say the name Brad Pitt, and many people are going to be willing to sit down and watch that movie and go to a movie theater to do so. I'm really excited about the movies that Brad Pitt has on the docket. One of them is a Formula One racing movie directed by Top Gun Maverick filmmaker Joseph Kosinski. What I think that movie shows is that Brad Pitt is still really interested and invested in being a movie star. Like, he wants to be in a big movie that's hopefully really good and epic in scale. He's also planning on making a sci-fi film with Bike Riders writer-director Jeff Nichols, one of my favorite filmmakers. As you can tell from listening, I'm a massive fan of the work of Brad Pitt, and I'm really excited to see what he does with the last half of his career. Like, I want him to work with all of the great directors. I also want to see Brad Pitt get a second Oscar win because I do believe he is in that pantheon of great actors that deserves to have more than one Oscar. It's great that he won his Oscar for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but he should also have a second Oscar. He should have won for Moneyball, possibly The Assassination of Jesse James. The other thing that I want, and you should want as well if you are a fan of Brad Pitt, is for him to make a fourth film with director David Fincher. That is the pairing I want to see. I think David Fincher and Brad Pitt is one of the best director-actor pairings of all time. And look, I love the recent David Fincher Netflix films, Mank and The Killer, but I desperately want to see him re-team with Brad Pitt. The rarity of Pitt isn't that he's a movie star. There have been many movie stars. The rarity of him is the longevity. He's been so relevant for so long, and he's been so good for so long. Yes, there have been stretches where he hasn't been great, and there have been a few off movies, but I've always felt like he's always tried to do something interesting. I think that's what Brad Pitt's main focus of his career has been, to be an interesting actor, not just to be someone who is famous and in movies. For the most part, Brad Pitt has made the right career choices, and it's why he's Brad Pitt. It's why he's remained one of our most consistent movie stars. I hope this podcast gets you to watch the films of Brad Pitt, and I get it, most of you have seen Ocean's 11. The three films that I think have been underseen are The Mexican, Spy Game, and the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. I think Brad Pitt does some of his best acting in those films, and I think in the case of Spy Game and The Mexican, he proves why he's a great movie star, and dare I say, great actor. Thanks for listening to this edition of Pop Culture Spotlight. I'm Cameron McKinney, and there'll be a new episode of the podcast every Thursday on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, so please rate, review, and subscribe.